Welcome back. We have a good idea of how to test React components. But what about Redux and some of the reducers, actions, and constants that we have? Let's start off with reducers. And you're going to absolutely love this section. Because remember, our reducers are pure functions. And pure functions are a tester's dream. They're the easiest to test. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new file, call it reducers.test.js. And then in here, I'm going to import, we need the constants. So I'm going to import the constants and obviously our reducer. So we'll do import star as a new syntax as reducers from reducers. With this syntax, we can just do reducers dot whatever reducer that we've exported. So in our case, reducers dot search robots, reducers dot request robots, which reads nicely. All right, let's group these reducers this time around by using a describe block. So let's do describe search robots. We're going to do our first reducer here. And within here, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Within here, we're going to have a test. The first test that says should return the initial state. Now, the initial state in the search robots reducer can be tested like this. So we can do expect reducers dot search robots. So that's our reducer. And remember, our reducer takes two things, a state and an action. And because if state doesn't exist or is undefined, we give it the initial state search. Let's do that. I'm going to say that the reducer.searchRobots gets undefined, so no state at the beginning, and it's going to get no action, but let's just give it an empty action for now. We want to test for those cases where, we have an undefined state. What happens? Well, we want it to equal our ideal state. And our ideal state in this case is to have search field to be an empty string. So let me save that. Open up our testing suite. And all right, everything is passing. If I press A, see that, everything is logged out nicely, including our reducers.test. If we put in A in the search field, it's going to fail. All right, so that's great. That was super, super easy. What else can we do? Well, we expected that this reducer, when we see our change search field event, that it returns a new state. So once again, we can say that it should handle the change search field event. And we can say reducers.searchRobots, let's make this a little bit smaller, is going to get the state of, let's say, an empty state. Or, you know what? Let's add a const initial state search here and say that this initial state search is search field equals to this. All right, so we can just use initial search. So this is going to be the initial state, which equals to the empty string. And it's going to receive an action. And what kind of action is it going to receive? I'm going to remove this for now. Well, if you remember, our actions are going to have a type. And in this case, we'll say that type is going to be change search field that comes from our constants file. and we can make up the payload that it's going to send. So let's just say for now that the payload is going to be ABC. Now, what do we expect from that output? We expect that once it goes through this reducer, that the search field is going to equal ABC. So we can say search field should be ABC. Again, we have our initial state search, which is an empty string. It goes through this reducer with this action, and we now need the state, because remember, this reducer is just going to return the state. We want the state to be ABC. Let's save. And we have a bit of a fail here. Let's see what kind of an error we get. And it looks like just the unexpected token. Oh, and we need an extra bracket here. And we get an error saying that type is not defined because well, we don't need the type here. That's just a typo on my part. All right, so that's passing. How simple is that? With reducers, all we need to do is just give it some sort of an input and expect an output. And you can just keep going like this forever. Make your tests better and better. Let's do the next reducer now. Let's say that we want to, and let's make more space here. We want to describe the request robots reducer. In that case, we can just say that we have, well, let's create an initial state. So I'm going to, again, say const initial state for the robots. And if you remember, we have this as the initial state. So I'm just going to actually copy this. So this is our initial state for the test. And we want to do the same thing as above. It should return the initial state. So let's just copy and paste the above and just change the search robots to request robots. And we want that to equal the initial state. Let's save. And we have a failed test. Let's see what we failed here. Initial state robots is not defined because I need to add a const in here. Let's save. All right, everything is passing. We're getting our initial state as expected. That's good, but let's do another test and say that we want the 3 cases over here to be tested. So let's do an initial it should handle requests robots. Let's do pending first action, and it's going to have something similar to here. So again, we're going to use the expect statement. It's going to have the reducers dot this time request robots. It's going to receive the initial state of the robots. And then we'll give it an action of type request robots pending and a payload of, let's give it is pending to true. So we expect that when this happens, actually, if we take a look at the reducer, we see that it automatically sends the is pending to true, and there's no payload. So we don't need to set that. We don't need to send a payload, but we expect that payload to change from is pending. Well, let's do false here, because is pending when we start off is always false. And in here, we want this to equal the state of robots with an empty array is pending set to true. So let's save. All right, everything is passing, but I just noticed here that we don't actually want the default is pending to be true. We want it to be false because when we first have the initial state, well, we haven't sent the promise yet. We haven't requested anything from the API. If we go into our reducers file, we see that we have the initial state here by true. By mistake, we can just change that to false. Let's save. And in here, let's save here. Perfect. Everything is working, and the request robots pending is changing our is pending state to true. All right, let's keep going. We have the second case, which is the success. So I'm just going to copy and paste here, and this time say request robots pending success. And this success should have, well, what should it have? Well, we need some sort of payload because, again, in our reducers, we have the robots action payload that we return or add to the state upon success. So let's just create that. In our type, we're going to say payload. And I'm going to return, let's just create a dummy ID of 123. Let's say name of test. And then finally, email of test@gmail.com. You see over here that this is a string instead of a number. I believe in our component, we're actually not distinguishing between a number and a string, so that's something we might want to fix in the future. But for now, we expect that if the payload is that, the state now gets updated with that payload. So let's copy that. And we also expect the is pending to be false. Again, if we remember our reducer, we're also changing our is pending to false on success. So let's save. And we have a bit of an error here. That is a simple arch nemesis comma. If we save, there it is, it passes. One final test. You can see it can get pretty repetitive with tests, but this is a good thing. With reducers, they're so simple to test that you just copy and paste a lot of the code, which again is fine for testing because this code was never going to go into production. So let's do the fail case here. That is the failed. And in this case, we want the payload. If we go back to our function, we want the payload to just have an error. So again, back here, we can just say, no, super upset that we got an error. And we expect the state to now have an error that is of no, and a is pending of false. Although I see here that we're actually not turning the is pending to false, which we should be. So if we save, add a comma, but we also expect the robots array to be returned, remember? So the robots array should be empty. And now we have this passing. Very cool. All right, that's enough for reducers. You see how simple they are to test. Simply checking the input against the output. And that's why you want to have these reducers everywhere and why Redux is so amazing. It's super easy to test. And if you think about it, all our logic is in our reducers. So if we have really, really good tests for our reducers, we cover a lot of the logic of our applications because reducers are the thing that take in actions and spit out the state. They're pretty much the controller or the brain of our app. Redux allows us to have really, really nice tests and keeping things simple on the React side by just doing snapshot testing or simple enzyme tests and testing out pure functions, which again is very useful. But for now, that's it for me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.